You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specialising in content acquisition, strategy, research and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights. Gain strategic insight into the evolving TV landscape. Download the 2025 Trends and Predictions Report at 3vision.tv.
Hello and welcome to Inside Content. My name is Jack Davison. I'm EVP at 3Vision. It's great to be here today with our listeners. Today's episode of Inside Content is a different one, which is a good thing, to do things slightly differently. It's different really for two reasons. One is that my guest is a journalist and I guess if I use the term correctly, but a creative director for numerous TV industry events with over 20 years of experience. And dare I say it, for fear of being a little bit unfair to some of my previous and future guests, no particular agenda to support when we discuss this. Secondly, we're here to talk more generally about some of the key issues and trends facing the industry today, fueled and guided by our own annual trend survey that, if you haven't got, you can pick up off our website at 3vision.tv. And we've produced that survey for 6 years now, back when probably fast and generative AI were a mere glimmer in the eye of the TV industry, and peak TV was still not even at its peak. But I guess welcome, Stewart. Thanks for doing this with us.
Great to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's great. Where are you today? What are you up to?
I'm currently in London, and the moment the podcast record finishes, I will be leaving for Heathrow to go to the Cannes Film Festival.
Right, great. Right in the thick of it. That should be some very interesting discussions going on down there, but maybe that'll come up. Let me before we go into it, let me just set the context for the trend survey for everybody, just in case you're not so familiar with it, but also to add a bit of colour and context to the survey itself that you may have read. But the survey itself, in it, we focus down on areas that obviously specifically impact the content industry, and we gather kind of the views and thoughts of distributors, producers, service operators, and whilst actually it's complicated to segment the respondents, and because I guess they all span so multiple different business areas, they do, just to be clear, they include kind of major US studios on the distribution side, channel groups, that's free and pay, they're from kind of US, UK, and kind of Western and Central and Eastern Europe. There'll be a few broader ones, but that's the bulk of their geographical area. Lots of major sort of producer distributor businesses, again from US and Europe primarily, and service operators as well from the same kind of area, and that covers off kind of SVOD, pay TV, fast and AVOD players. And I would say it skews slightly more towards kind of the producer distributor side of the business, but the others are very well represented. And there are a few kind of tech solution providers, aggregators, sort of smaller producers, but in smaller numbers. And it's completed between December 24 and January 25 in about a month's period. And we asked them to kind of look back over the year and then look forward. And I think kind of from our point of view, certainly 2024 was a pretty remarkable year. Kind of just generally, kind of AI was obviously very much at the top of the hype curve with innovation, kind of maybe alongside weight loss drugs. But kind of, I guess, more kind of influentially, kind of geopolitically, economically, kind of all the big picture challenges were huge, and they're ongoing with the kind of I guess self-proclaimed or I'm not quite sure, the King of America, creating enough uncertainty and trade tensions, but generally not just Trump, but generally plenty of trade and policy uncertainty. I think someone told me that half the world went to the ballot box in 2024, and there was loads of economic uncertainty. So not before we even get to issues very specific to our industry, there were lots of challenges. And I think kind of we're not going to do a page turn. It's 27 pages long, but that wouldn't make a great podcast. But I've asked Stuart's had a read of it. I've asked him to pick out a few things. I'll pick out a few things, and I guess I'll start with you, Stuart. What would you like to talk about first?
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in the report, and it's nice you kind of take the sort of temperature of the industry in this way. I mean, the one thing that there's, like I said, there's a lot of good stuff. One thing that jumped out for me was that piece around studio content and monetization and such like. 'Cause that's kind of very for Deadline. Certainly, that's something that we write about a lot, we speak about a lot, and kind of feels like there's a kind of yet another moment of change if we're not in a constant moment of change.
Yes, I agree. We're slightly biased actually, also because windowing is a big part of the work we do. But it was undoubtedly kind of a big feature of the year how businesses can kind of be more efficient, kind of find more revenues, and part of that was the studios and their kind of selling of content, and I guess part of that to me is I almost maybe I'm simplifying, but I feel that like kind of in the as the peak TV kind of world kind of started growing and kind of growing kind of I felt like, and with direct to consumer services in particular, and that investment in really big hits that they could kind of shout about, the value of any project, I'll use the term loosely, but project like a show was kind of condensed in its first initial use. And I don't think people ignored the later tail value, but it was condensed in that use. It stood up on that and kind of not quite that alone. Whereas now there seems to be a recognition that kind of that there was a reason why people windowed it, and there was more value later on. I don't know whether that makes sense to you, but that's one way I look at it.
I think that makes perfect sense. And actually, as you say, you folks are particularly good at talking about windowing, and I think it was around the turn of the year, I did a sit down with Lisa Kramer, who runs distribution. By distribution, in this instance, I mean content sales for Paramount Global. And their message, absolutely loud and clear, writ large, we are focusing on second window opportunities. They are looking to, because as you say, it's about monetizing kind of catalog. It's about monetizing content right through the value chain as well. But I think that the key change, what underpins that, and I don't know if you agree, but it feels to me that we've emerged from that moment whereby the studios had their own streaming services, put their arms around content, kept hold of it, and they realised that they're just not unlocking the full value of it now. So Paramount's a great example, particularly with we can see what's happened with Paramount Plus, and the broadcaster demand for second window movies still work in that window, and those kind of big shiny US dramas work really well. And I think what's interesting with those US dramas is often, I won't, I'm old enough to remember when they played at kind of 9 p.m. on terrestrial TV. I think what you see now is perhaps they stack up and they fill kind of some digital channels, secondary channels, but that's not to sort of, belie their value and their kind of fan appeal. You look at the NCISs of this world, they're some of the biggest shows in the world. And at the same time, they don't always get, I think there's a lot of focus. I'm as guilty as the next person in this respect to kind of focusing on the sort of White Lotus, premium, prestige, very cool end of the drama spectrum. And I think what that does sometimes is not to recognise the kind of those US procedural, shows like, whether it's Elspeth or all of the CSIs, etc. And not everything has to be a Paramount show. They're just the ones that are coming to mind because I'm recalling that interview. They travel incredibly well. They work incredibly well. Where they're positioned in schedules and channels has changed. But I kind of think that we're going back to a moment of seeing the Hollywood studios, the fewer of them now, of course, but wanting to open up their doors somewhat to selling to broadcasters around the world. And I think a clear sign of that, actually, is what you see happening with the LA screenings this year. The LA screenings used to be a huge get together. Let's be honest, if you're a European buyer, a trip to LA where each of the studios rolls out the red carpet and gives you a great goodie bag is probably not the worst trip of the year. And it kind of went away in that form for a period of time. And now it's back. My inbox is full of people from the studios themselves saying, hey, can we talk about this year's LA screenings? So as I say, there might be a smaller number of studio distribution arms, but I feel that to some extent, that business has ramped up again.
I definitely agree with the points you're making there, and I think I don't think I actually read the interview you had with Lisa at Paramount, but I know they have been, and Lisa has been very clear and great at talking about what they're doing. Because not a lot of the studios are so clear and open about their strategy, even though you can maybe read into it. But they've actually been really vocal about it, which is nice. And you can see it. I mean, you can see in the UK. A lot of people. I saw Halo's now on Netflix. Kind of loads of the Paramount content, so not just on Channel 5, as on other services which they own on other services in the UK. M6 in France is showing a lot of. I think they put in sort of winners with Tulsa King and other big kind of Paramount shows, and quicker, faster windows, and they're doing a lot. And I think Disney did a lot of kind of free TV second windows as well last year, kind of things like Dope Sick, Dropout, kind of more of the shows that were on FX and Hulu in the States that were finding kind of second windows. And I
it's
think
interesting, isn't it,
right,
though, Jack? Because what you see is just at a consumer level, because I think, people listening in here and people who look at your research would kind of often know where a given piece of content emanated from. But now when you open up, you look at the tiles on a Netflix page or any of the big streaming services, and I often have these moments of like, that's a BBC show distributed by BBC Studios. You kind of, some of the lines you draw are quite, and you mentioned a couple of examples as well, but no longer does a show made, produced, distributed by kind of a given entity sort of have to live in house. But when you know where they came from, I have quite a lot of kind of double takes now when I open any of the streaming services, it seems.
It's often we have to disassociate ourselves with the business to think about it as a consumer, which is quite hard to do. But and it's and knowing where the content is for consumers is awful. I mean, there's plenty of consumers who say, "What's Paramount Plus?" Like they still might not know what it is, which would horrify Paramount Plus and those people in that business. But I think it's true in certainly even in the UK, where kind of they have been doing a fair bit of marketing. But it links actually to the one of the points I was going to pull out of the deck. Which was the kind of, because I always like kind of looking. I pay a bit more attention to the kind of the innovation of the services, and it's around the free TV kind of area, and that those were sort of the I guess in highlight terms of it, kind of your I guess if I find the slide, so you know what I'm talking about. But it's the commentary we had on where free TV are investing their time and what they're spending their kind of effort on. And I think we've all seen, as we've just talked about, we've all seen that increase in digital kind of premieres, and I think kind of the respondents we had, like kind of 66% of them said it kind of that was kind of their most important focus was exclusive digital content premieres, but right up there kind of next to it, and the next kind of two were kind of just more content on digital that's next to their linear premieres, so stacked catch up and so on, and more library. And I think there's lots of numbers you can see on volumes being up, but also our own data shows the number of digital premieres that go up. And the thing that I think fascinated me last year was we were doing some analysis for a different client on kind of the different services in global markets, different sort of local streamers and different apps, and kind of who they all were, looking at the landscape. And what struck me was kind of that usually kind of the major BVOD players have got the greatest reach in every market. They don't have the greatest viewing, but they've got the greatest reach. Like if they're not at the top, they're certainly in the top three, the sort of the PSB maybe, and the top commercial broadcasters. So kind of this investment it's almost a simple equation. We've got to translate that reach to viewing, and we've got to do it.
But I think you make a great point about reach, and also I think because we're talking about here legacy companies. That legacy means they're sort of those brands are well known in each of those markets. But this is going off at a tangent. But permit me. I think at a moment where there's a big narrative around what happens after peak drama and so forth. And as we sit here in the UK, it's a very crunchy time in terms of getting drama funded, notably with US co-pro money leaving the room to a large extent. You looked at Series Mania this year, kind of the US were kind of light on the ground in terms of the people who were there with money and buying and so forth. But I think and that has drawn into relief, and I'm going to bring this back to your point, this is not just totally meandering, is that throughout all of that now, throughout that period, notably the public broadcasters, but also those legacy commercial broadcasters never stopped commissioning. I just think a lot of attention was put upon the streamers and what they were ordering. It became kind of, because it was sexy and exciting, and also because they were paying extraordinary amounts of money. But I think now what we see, certainly at a production level, at an industry level, is like the drama industry really kind of going back to valuing that piece that never went away, which is to use the UK example, kind of the BBC or the ITV or the Channel 4 Commission, or France Television, ZDF, ARD, etc. I kind of think that the public broadcasters and the legacy commercial broadcasters are actually their importance perhaps got diminished in terms of an industry narrative. And we've kind of gone a little bit full circle now. The world of streaming has changed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think, and I think if anything, there is I should tie this into actually a piece in the survey if I'll remember while I'm talking where it is. But one of the things that came back in this survey and also kind of has come back to us throughout the year is kind of is the need to be kind of a bit more. You've got to make an effort to put your project together and find those pieces and put them together. And to what, as you just said, kind of, yes, probably that those broadcasters have been neglected. Yes, there's sort of, they appeared in lots of they were commissioning partners with shows over the years, but I think now they're even more important, as a result, because kind of the possibility, I mean, the money's not there to sort of take a risk and green light something without kind of enough partners on board, I guess.
Absolutely. But also it's interesting you mentioned Paramount Plus. Without making this just about Paramount, I noticed something else they're doing, which I kind of find or have found interesting, is instead of launching a standalone service D2C, and of course, things are increasingly bundled. When I look at Paramount Plus, it's via my Sky subscription. But what I notice now is instead of launching in a new territory, they wouldn't call it. I think they call it a branded destination or some such. Essentially, it's what we would have just called a branded block that lives, within the ecosystem of a telco or a pay TV company. And that's something that we used to hear about quite a lot. But I guess it removes the risk factor of having to market D2C. I guess in terms of windowing, it probably allows you to sell to other people in that market a little bit more fluidly. But again, it just speaks to this idea that the content is traveling somewhat more freely. I think, we noticed that last year, and I can only see that continuing.
Yeah. I mean, that ties into the bundling aspect of the trend survey. But I think they call them hubs now instead of branded blocks. They call them branded hubs.
You're right.
Which is maybe a slight refinement, but that enables them to do it slightly differently. But and you're right. But it isn't just Paramount. I know. Okay, HBO and Warner with Max. They're not really, they're not doing that. They are launching kind of Macs. So they're launching Macs in a market like Australia and in a market like UK. But in all intents and purposes, the partnership they have with Foxtel in Australia, it might as well be a branded hub because and in some respects with Sky it's the same. So they're taking that established relationship with the Sky customer base, with the Sky product. You know that when they launch that within the user interface, the experience will be such that yes, there'll be some Max branding, but actually it will still be a sort of mixed kind of service where you're within Sky, like how you see Paramount within Sky. You probably don't see a lot of the Paramount branding, and people who get Max, some of them may not appreciate the difference. But I guess the difference is that you can still subscribe to Max separately, like whereas some of these Paramount content hubs, it's the only way you can get it within it. So and those differences are not insignificant, but kind of that whole kind of it's a little bit kind of like we used to sort of do. There was a lot of attention on the kind of area of bundling for quite a few years, sort of, and we used to call it the great rebundling that was sort of going on. And I guess it was around, because I remember when the first deals happened, we were around 2013 when kind of Netflix was sort of, I think that's the first sort of pay TV deal they did with, I think, Virgin Media and maybe Comcast at the same time. But that's when they were doing lots of telco mobile bundlings, when I think everyone would just about admit that they threw a lot of value out the window by kind of giving away 3 months of Netflix and other services, and not a lot of people got appreciation out of it. And then gradually everyone started realizing, okay, let's do better sort of bundles. And as markets matured, kind of those bundles got with more significant people. Then they got deeper. They got kind of went from being an app on the box to an integrated with a pack or in the bill to being in basic. Like so, that's been and that came out in the survey that kind of. More and more of those, and SVOD with SVODs are going to happen, I think.
Is there, Jack? Do you see a parallel? Let me ask you a question, because both of us have probably been around long enough to have seen that first wave of pay TV, where effectively in each country the pay TV operators just started aggregating more and more channels. But is what's happening now? It's really, instead of aggregating kind of channels, in fact, if anything, they're probably thinning their lineups. That what happens now is really it's still an aggregation story, but you're just aggregating different distinct SVOD services within your own walls, if for want of a better word, in your own ecosystem, I think is the word I want.
Yeah, I think for someone like a UK cable, like Virgin Media or kind of telcos, nothing's changed at all. It's exactly the same. They're a big fat pipe that's selling content, and if someone's got premium content that their subscribers want, they need to make it available on the service. And so therefore, kind of they'll. But if they aggregating Netflix is no different from Virgin Media aggregating Sky on the platform, which is what they used to do. I guess it gets a bit more challenging when you talk about someone like a Sky. It's like an operator that really invested in premium content directly, built channel brands, built sport. There's a little issue coming up, but built sport, and for them, it's not really a change in that kind of they nearly always had to bring in some third party, but not quite in the same way as the kind of the cables and the telcos had to do. But they have to now. They resisted for so long, but now kind of they've just got to have it. They've got to have Netflix, and they've got to offer the customers more value. They've had a lot of erosion in terms of pricing and ARPUs, so they've had to reinvent themselves, and even Sky, even Canal in France, even the ones that kind of resisted for so long, they've had to reinvent themselves.
And Jack, let me also, sorry, I know that I feel like I'm interviewing you, but back to that windowing piece, because I know, like I say, you always are you're very good in this respect. When we talk about second windows, are they now? There was a moment when I started out many years ago. You knew what the windows were. It was X number of days for every given window. Whereas it doesn't feel like that anymore. So even when we talk about second windows, like in your mind, are you very clear on what each window is and the given length of time? 'Cause to me, it feels that it might differ by territory or certainly by region or even by studio.
Yeah, it does. And actually, I was trying to see if that tied into one of the things we asked, but there is a lot more variation now than there ever was, and whilst maybe kind of certain things will start standardizing, you're seeing kind of faster turnaround of windows, but it does. I think that because there are quite a few different dynamics going on, there is still, in my view, kind of still quite a bit of water to flow under the bridge in lots of markets, because it's about when you're windowing, you have to kind of make sure there are synergies there. Okay, so because what you do upstream affects what happens downstream. So I keep doing river analogies, but and if you look at kind of what's happening, it seems that kind of, yes, they're trying to generate cash, the studio, so they're trying to create faster second windows, and maybe if it's their service that's the first window, then the kind of the lever, they've got more levers they control, so they don't have to worry about upsetting the first client because they are the first client, but they do have to make sure they get the best outcome, so that kind of the right amount of value is seen by the subscribers. It doesn't, if they do it too quickly, eventually subscribers will get wise enough to think, well, I don't need to subscribe to that because it'll end up on the BBC or end up on something else. So but at least they control that, and so they might do a faster second window, and also the emergence of more co-exclusivity, which is sort of happening, where it will stay on the SVOD streamer and then go on the second window at the same time. But it's not fixed, and there's lots of variety in different markets. And I think equally, kind of some people still aren't quite sure, so they might start saying, well, I don't want to put it on Netflix. I don't want to take something that's been on Netflix because there's so many people in our country that have got Netflix, but I don't mind if it's been on HBO Max because that's a particular segment that doesn't cross over mine, so that has a good second window route. So there's quite a lot of factors, I think, that complicate matters, and therefore there's a lot of variation.
And I think there's a slide in your survey report about the importance attributed to different windows. So this is talking about movies, and it's interesting. I think it was. Let me get it up. It was first of all, I think the most value / importance was attributed to domestic theatrical, then international theatrical.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just looking at that. Was an interesting slide. You're right, because and I think what it was what it shouted at actually was that the kind of theatres are back, like the sending things straight to SVOD are no longer is no longer kind of the best way forward. And I think that was, we saw that, everyone saw that in their own lives last year, and I think that was clear. But we're always in danger in our survey actually of not through the survey not enabling people to come up with enough negatives, because you prompt them with too many kind of, is this a value? Of course they'll say yes, but I think they do. What was interesting was that all of those windows had some value, and if you look at things like kind of the transactional windows and the home end windows that were kind of really took a hit kind of with some of the DTC release kind of policies, that you could see that kind of in that kind of one on page 22 and then on page 23 as well, kind of that they do value, they see that premium VOD kind of transactional window being a good value. They'll find a way for it to be a kind of a window shortly after theatrical.
I mean, just from a consumer standpoint, again, that premium VOD window, I don't know. I've never seen stats broken out for how lucrative or numbers that is for a given title. It seems like that data is hard to come by. But just anecdotally, I can get to the movie theatre, cinema, to use the UK language, the other day to see something with the kids, and it was on PVOD, and it was 20 quid. And that seemed, I was like, 20 quid seemed like quite a chunky amount of money. But then that versus 3 cinema tickets and all the other expense as well. I kind of find that window interesting, And I just wonder, I don't know if you have any, insight into how, in terms of the actual uptake at that, it is premium in terms of the pricing, certainly.
Yeah, we don't get insight into actual revenues there, but what we do know is that the studios are targeting it. They've been adjusting their windows, kind of making kind of subtle changes, kind of releasing a bit more with PVOD. Not all of them, and they also have slightly different kind of approaches to how they do it. And actually, sometimes it gets affected by the particular type of movie it is and what time of the year it was launched. So it's quite hard to trend and know. But they are targeting it, and I think and actually in the survey we can see that kind of they do still value it. So it's there. I think it's also just an indication of the fact that they want those windows back again. That's what they were masters at in the old days, and they want them back to try and get as much revenue as possible.
I mean, the other one that really jumped out, and I mean, for the kind of stuff that I write about and cover, was really that piece that you had, the slide on the production market. And, it's writ large. I'm looking at it now. Content will need to be made for lower budgets. New partnership models will need to be found. I mean, I think that really is an excellent summary of where we're at in terms of the actual production piece, the production story, as it were.
Yeah, but that was my least favorite. Not the way this question was asked.
We've got your favourite. This was your least favourite.
No, when people asked me a question last year, my least favourite question was, "Are things getting better?" Do people think it's getting better at our commission? And I just, because I'm not like you talk. I mean, we get our knowledge through talking to lots of people, and generally people are quite down on things, but also there are green shoots in places, and some people have kind of got a good story to talk about. So it's just very hard to answer. But it is. The one that obviously, you're right, it came out strongest there. The two strongest ones were that they're going to have to make content for lower budgets, but I think that's just common sense because we saw budgets going up and up and up and up and up, and that just doesn't matter what industry you're in, that's not sustainable. So whatever you're making, and then also the fact that new types of partners are going to have to found to make projects work. So I think it's probably not necessarily new, but kind of different partnerships between people have to be found, and that was clear that kind of people were trying to work out different ways to do things, which even past the production side of it, even went into the windowing as well, when sort of post that bit. So those came out kind of very, very strongly. And that, I guess, also the third one is risk, isn't it? I guess that kind of the appetite for risk kind of fell because everyone was kind of, more nervous and money was not so cheap anymore.
I think the appetite for risk can be seen. The diminished appetite for risk can be seen in a couple of ways. One is in terms of the volume of commissioning and how much is spent on a given commission. But two, it is that secondarily is about what is commissioned. So that kind of that move to that kind of cozy crime piece, stuff that is going to work. And I kind of feel that we have there will always be notable, examples that disprove the rule. Of course there will. Baby Reindeer came out of nowhere, was perhaps something that hadn't been seen in many respects, although that was from a streamer. And Mr. Bates again. There are always going to be things that disprove it. But I think broadly you can see that commissioners have played it relatively safely. Everyone's protecting their job. They need to protect their audiences. And I just think you can see it on screen to an extent.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess we probably should kind of, we're close to wrapping up. But the only other one I thought it would be good to ask you about was your thoughts on consolidation. That word. What you felt about, I guess the problem is that's a whole nother podcast, isn't it? Because you can talk about it from a US media point of view, and whether there is possible kind of any further consolidation this year. But I guess then over here, kind of lots of people talking about what's going to happen with the ITV Studios business. But I don't know whether you feel kind of this year there's any big things likely to happen.
Yeah, it absolutely does feel that that's the case. I think one thing that doesn't get often talked about, ironically, you have just mentioned it, in fact, but is consolidation at a distributor level. And by distributor, I think, I know those organisations don't really like to be called that anymore. Content companies, but essentially the content arm. So ITV Studios is the production and distribution arm of ITV. But I think Fremantle in play, according to, was it FT or Reuters? It wasn't a Deadline piece, but those conversations. RTL had to, or Bertelsmann had to respond to those questions, because I think what you see is that it's not new, is it, that people think about scale. But then, look at what Banerjee has, I was about to say quietly, hasn't been quiet at all. It's brought Endemol and Shine together. It's noisily, become a company with, 100 something thousand hours or more of programming. They're still very acquisitive. So kind of that All Three Media has been taken out of the equation, but does, under its new ownership, does it become a consolidator? Does it kind of do a roll up as well? Because it's clearly well funded now as well. So I think when you think about those, the main, what I would still call distribution companies, which are All Three Media, International, Fremantle, ITV Studios, Banerjee, I think we're certainly going to be seeing, rumblings, if not actual deals getting done this year involving all of those in one respect or another. And that's before you even get down to kind of tier below, where you're talking about, still sizable organisations, the Cineflix rights of this world, who are making a ton of interesting shows. But that's certainly a piece that I'm very, very alive to, really watching closely, because then they can start to match those Hollywood studios that we talked, well, if not match, can sort of play in those, that same league. To do that, to really effectively, you have to have a huge library. You have to have a huge catalogue, and then you can do interesting things in terms of how you monetize that and exploit it across windows. And I think we're going to see people really trying to scale what they have in terms of catalogues and the rights piece of it all.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. I'm not as convinced. I don't think I have as much kind of insight and knowledge in that area, but I do agree with that. But conversely, I'm not convinced. Whilst I think some assets will sort of interesting things will happen to assets in the US, I'm not convinced there can be kind of any sort of seismic kind of consolidation over there. I just don't see how those pieces could kind of fit together, kind of in the world that they live in. I don't know.
Who knows? I haven't spoken to David Zaslav of late. I mean, I have interviewed him many times over the years, but I think the people running those companies always looking for deals, and it's that's what they've always done.
It's certainly David Zaslav. You're right. Like, I think he'd probably get itchy feet if he hadn't acquired something in the world.
Quite so. But I think that's a definite. Never. I know. I totally hear what you're saying. It feels that there aren't how many logical kind of consolidation moves are left before these ones even play through. With Paramount again, and other things still kind of in the works. But in 25 years of covering US and international businesses, I'll definitely never say never in terms of those big scale US moves.
Very good. Well, I think we probably there's loads to talk about, but I think we should probably call it a day. But
it was a cracking read. I really enjoyed going through it. There's lots to dig in there, to dig into there, and it's great that you folks put that together and put it out.
Actually, at the end of the year, it's almost a little bit of a luxury for us. I mean, because like we obviously have loads of business to do, loads of client work. We've got some products we run that we have to do. So doing the survey is a little bit of a luxury. It's good for us because to reach out to people and talk and do this. I enjoy it every year. It's well worth it. But I'm glad you enjoyed it, and thank you a lot for coming on.
Yeah, great to see you. Cheers for that. Enjoyed it. Good chat.
Good, and enjoy Cannes. I hope the festival goes well.
Yeah, thanks. All the best. Nice one.
All right, take
See
care.
you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.